Welcome to the historic Garrett-Jacobs mansion. In order to appreciate this mansion, you should try to imagine that you are back into the latter half of the 19th and early part of the 20th centuries, when the merchant princes of the day lavished untold wealth on building homes which they considered suitable for living and entertaining. For nearly 60 years, from the 1870s to the 1930s, this was the home of members of the most prominent family in Maryland, the Garretts. From the beginning of the 19th century, the family was influential in building commerce and industry in Baltimore, and eventually in directing the country's first railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio. They were all great philanthropists, who left their indelible mark in the arts, medicine, and education. The mansion also represents a unique, unprecedented blending of styles of two of the greatest American architects, Stanford White and John Russell Pope. The original part of the mansion, number 11 West Mount Vernon Place, was built in 1853 by Samuel George on land that originally belonged to Revolutionary War hero John Eager Howard. In 1872, it was given as a wedding present, along with all the furnishings, by B&O President John Work Garrett to his son Robert and his bride, Mary Frick. Over the next 32 years, the mansion was expanded to include adjoining townhouses and eventually encompassed 40,000 square feet. This was the largest, most opulent townhouse ever built in Baltimore, and vied with the most luxurious New York brownstones of the Vanderbilts and Astors. The mansion boasted 40 rooms, 100 windows, 16 fireplaces, a theater, an art gallery of fine paintings, one of the handsomest conservatories in a private home in this country, a compartmentalized elevator, and an elegant supper room with a musician's balcony. This was one of 10 mansions and estates the extended Garrett family owned around the country in the Gilded Age. Mr. and Mrs. Garrett usually spent the months between Christmas and Easter in residence here, and then moved on to their other estates in Newport, Rhode Island, Baltimore County, and Garrett County, Maryland. Mary Frick Garrett, who later became Mrs. Henry Barton Jacobs after the death of Mr. Garrett in 1896, was the undisputed social arbiter of Baltimore. She entertained in a truly regal manner comparable with grandes dames on the East Coast. She was a very philanthropic woman, and when she died in 1936, left the greater part of her $5.5 million fortune to charity, particularly for the medical care of children. She herself was childless. Following her death, the mansion was willed to Dr. Jacobs for life. He was a renowned physician and researcher in tuberculosis. After his death in 1939, the mansion and its contents were sold at public auction. William Cook bought the house for use as a funeral home, but zoning laws prevented this use. The Boomy Temple bought the building from Mr. Cook in 1941 and made many alterations to the house. The Boomy Temple sold the mansion to the city of Baltimore in 1958, and it remained vacant, unheated, and deteriorating until 1961, when the Engineering Society of Baltimore leased the building from the city, which had planned to destroy the building as part of an urban renewal and expansion project for the Walters Art Gallery. In 1962, the club purchased it outright and began a dedicated effort to preserve and maintain the historic structure. In 1971, the mansion's significance was officially recognized by the Maryland Historic Trust. The Garrett-Jacobs Mansion has also been listed in the National Register of Historic Places as part of the Mount Vernon Place Historic District. Mrs. Garrett hired architect Stanford White, who gutted number 11 and installed the present vestibule with its Italian mosaic floor, papier-mâché ceiling, columns of Egyptian Numidian marble, and Tiffany windows. Mr. White paneled the two-story entrance hall in stained English oak, delicately carved with floral and shell patterns. The hall was graced with 2 sets of armor, a Louis XV sedan chair, a Jacobean hall clock, and a Venetian lantern, which still hangs from the coffered ceiling. The hall's lantern, Louis XV sconces, Tiffany glass windows, and inglenooks flanking the fireplace are all typical of Stanford White, whose interpretations of the French Renaissance helped define 19th century Beaux-Arts style. White's signature feature in the Garrett-Jacobs mansion is a dramatic spiral staircase. Its newel posts and balustrade, carved in a rich design, culminate under a magnificent Tiffany glass dome. The family dining room walls are covered in 18th century Belgian tapestries, offset by paneling and lavishly carved oak fireplace and sideboard, all painted black to resemble ebony. Some of the room's more elaborate details, including solid silver hinges on the Oriental-style windows and fanciful nursery rhyme carvings on the sideboard, remain to this day. Mr. White constructed the Red Room, a ladies' withdrawing room where Mrs. Garrett served tea every day promptly at 5 o'clock. The beautiful domed plaster ceiling has been restored. The room is distinctive for its 4 pocket doors, all curved to maintain the oval shape of the room. The drawing room, just off the entrance hall and withdrawing room, was decorated by Mrs. Garrett in a French style. This light, airy room was, and still is, dominated by a splendid fireplace of Breche French violet marble. The chandeliers are of German crystal, with a fruit motif of apples and pears that was typical of the 19th century. When Mary Frick Garrett married Dr. Henry Barton Jacobs in 1902, 6 years after her first husband's death, she bought number 7 and engaged John Russell Pope, another court architect of the early 20th century, to design the addition. Like White, Pope was one of the most influential architects of his era. He went on to become the leading proponent of neoclassicism, most notably in Washington, D.C., where he designed the Constitution Hall, the National Archives Building, and the National Gallery of Art. In Baltimore, he designed the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Masonic Temple of Scottish Rite, and the University Baptist Church, as well as plans for the campus of Johns Hopkins University. Pope was responsible for the easternmost part of the Garrett-Jacobs mansion, including the library, a hall paved in tiles of buff-covered cane marble, a supper room, and a ballroom. The latter was particularly lavish, measuring 30 by 70 feet, with a large stage and pipe organ at one end, and a partially gilded ceiling inset with glass panels lighted from above. Dr. and Mrs. Jacobs' guests repaired to this room after supper downstairs to enjoy music and the tableaux vivants that were the fashion of the day. Seated on gilded benches, upholstered in red wine velvet, guests were surrounded by the Jacobs art collection, eventually valued at $2 million and donated to the Baltimore Museum of Art. Directly below the grand ballroom was the supper room, or Hall of Mirrors, where between 40 and 60 guests would dine from the gold service and Venetian goblets. Lit by delicate Messian chandeliers and sconces, this room opened onto the conservatory through an elevated musicians' gallery. Mr. Pope redecorated the first-floor drawing room, originally designed by Stanford White, furnishing it with furniture of the Louis XV, Louis XVI, and Regency eras, and brightening the environs with a Chinese rug in light and dark blue with touches of rose, gray, and deep blue. The walls were covered in old gold brocade over the dado, and were hung with Louis XVI gilded mirrors and Gobelin tapestries. One mirror still hangs behind the lavender mantel. Mr. Pope, eschewing the English oak favored by White, designed the library in proper baronial manner, paneling the room with hand-carved mahogany motifs in the style of 17th century master woodcarver Grinling Gibbons, and lighting it with English Baroque-style sconces. The library housed a collection of many rare books, most in the field of music and medicine, which was later donated to the Peabody Library. In 1913, the stables at the rear end of the house were raised, and a small gallery was built to house the art collection, forming the fourth wall of what would become one of the most splendid private conservatories in the country. Vibrant orchids, banana plants, a 20-foot rubber tree, and lemon and orange trees flourished in this 3-story atrium. Here, too, a fountain burbled and birds and monkeys roamed freely. 2 years later, Mrs. Garrett purchased number 13 to the west of number 11, and demolished portions in order to provide light and air for the magnificent Tiffany dome atop the Stanford White stairway. The conservatory was demolished for safety reasons prior to the club's arrival in 1961. The Garrett-Jacobs Mansion is a contributing structure to the Mount Vernon Place Historic District, a National Historic Landmark. Mount Vernon is the site of Baltimore's most significant 19th century architectural legacy, and home to many small businesses and restaurants, as well as to many of the city's leading cultural assets. The Engineers Club created the Garrett-Jacobs Mansion Endowment Fund with a mission to preserve and restore the architectural and historic character of the mansion, a legacy of Baltimore's 19th century architectural, cultural, business, and social history. The two organizations collaborate to restore, maintain, and improve the mansion to make it functional and accessible for public use. Together, they generate funds for its future preservation and maintenance through fundraising and obtaining public and private grants and gifts. The mansion was nearly demolished in the 1950s to build a new addition to the Walters Art Museum. Baltimore Heritage, a historic preservation society, led the campaign to the Engineers Club, which had been founded in 1905 after local engineers had come to the city's aid after the Great Fire of 1904. The club's purchase of the mansion continued their long tradition of service to Baltimore. By buying the building, they, along with the volunteers of Baltimore Heritage, saved it from certain demolition. The club has served as a conscientious steward of the Garrett-Jacobs legacy, carefully maintaining and restoring the mansion as a premier Baltimore historic and cultural landmark. We have not only preserved the mansion as a cherished artifact of another age, but have returned the building to its rightful role as a gathering place for social, business, and civic functions. A very popular event site, every year more than 40,000 members and visitors assemble at the mansion for professional, social, cultural, educational, and civic meetings. A master plan calls for restoration of all main floor rooms. The drawing room was the first of the main floor historic rooms to be restored in 2007. Baltimore firms, including Thomas More Studios and Johnson Berman Architects and Design, were hired to research and complete the project. The work was completed in June 2008 at a cost of $448,000. The Engineers Club has been an outstanding steward of the mansion since 1961. The endowment has joined them in that task since 1992, completing more than $6 million worth of major improvements over those years. The long-awaited protective easement between the Maryland Historic Trust and the club became official in February 2009, thus guaranteeing the mansion's place among historic buildings in Baltimore forever. Thank you for visiting us today. Commemorative brochures and posters are available for purchase at the reception desk.